Why did European and Native American ideas about each other change over time? That's a broad question, and it's all about cultural interactions. Let's break it down by looking at specific tribes, European nations, dates, battles, economic consequences, and figures to understand what really happened. When the Spanish first met the Aztecs in 1519, and when the English encountered the Powhatan in the early 1600s, both groups came face to face with vastly different worldviews. Religion, for example, was a major dividing line. The Aztecs had a complex belief system that involved multiple gods and human sacrifices, which shocked the Christian Spanish under the command of Hernan Cortes. Cortes wrote, "These people are much given to sacrifice, and their idols are covered with the blood of men and beasts." Meanwhile, many Native American tribes, like the Powhatan, believed in a spiritual connection to the land, which made it sacred to them. In contrast, the Europeans, especially the Spanish and English, were devoutly Christian and believed they had a divine mission to convert the heathens to Christianity. Missionaries like Bartolomé de las Casas and Junipero Serra played key roles in spreading Christianity among native populations, especially in Latin America and California. Las Casas even advocated for better treatment of Native Americans, famously writing, "The entire human race is one." Gender roles were another point of difference. While European societies placed men in charge of most things, some Native American tribes, like the Iroquois, had matrilineal systems, meaning that women controlled land and had significant political power. For example, Iroquois women had a voice in decision-making processes, especially in choosing male leaders, which surprised Europeans, who were used to male-dominated power structures. Early misunderstandings often define these interactions. The French, for example, who settled along the St. Lawrence River in the 1600s, worked closely with the Huron and other tribes in the fur trade, but they didn't always fully understand Native American cultural practices. For the French, alliances with native tribes were more about economic gain, while for many Native Americans, alliances were also about security and mutual respect. The Spanish conquest of the Incas under Francisco Pizarro in the 1530s led to confusion as well, particularly about land ownership. While the Incas managed land communally, the Spanish viewed land as something to be owned and exploited, leading to violent clashes and cultural misinterpretations. As trade became more common, both sides began to adopt some useful aspects of each other's culture. For instance, the French and English learned from the Algonquin how to hunt and trap animals like beavers, which were in high demand in Europe. On the other hand, Native Americans began to use European-made tools, guns, and horses, which changed their way of life. The Comanche, for example, became expert horse riders and expanded their territory significantly in the 1700s. Smaller tribes, like the Narragansett in New England, also began to trade with Europeans, especially in the fur trade, which eventually led to tensions over land. But as more Europeans arrived, things began to change dramatically. By the mid-1700s, the British were expanding deeper into Native American territories, pushing into areas controlled by the Cherokee and Shawnee. French and Indian War is a clear example of how these tensions boiled over. This war pitted the British against the French and their Native American allies, with devastating consequences for many tribes. In this war, key battles like the Battle of Fort Duquesne and Battle of Quebec highlighted the growing power of European armies, forcing Native American tribes to continually choose sides. The Cherokee initially allied with the British, but later turned against them when it became clear that the British were expanding too aggressively into their lands. The Treaty of Paris officially ended the war, but left Native American tribes like the Shawnee without much power as European dominance in North America increased. A notable conflict outside this war was Pontiac's rebellion, led by the Ottawa chief Pontiac, who united several tribes in an effort to push back British forces from the Great Lakes region after the war. Although the rebellion failed to drive out the British, it forced the British to rethink their policies regarding Native American lands, leading to the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which aimed to limit colonial expansion westward. However, this was poorly enforced, and settlers continued to move west, further angering Native American tribes. Further conflicts included Obi-Chan-Canu's uprising, part of the Anglo-Powhatan Wars, and the Pequot War, which saw a violent struggle between the Pequot tribe and English colonists in New England. Later, King Philip's War would become one of the deadliest wars per capita in American history. Metacom, King Philip, leading a coalition of tribes in an attempt to halt English expansion. "I am determined not to live until I have no country," Metacom famously declared. These battles were all pivotal in shaping the future of Native European relations. The increasing European encroachment on native lands wasn't just about taking territory, it was also about controlling economic prosperity. Europeans demanded more labor from Native Americans and exploited the land for its resources, leading to a breakdown in relations. The Spanish Encomienda system in Latin America, for example, forced native populations to work in mines and on plantations. Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro became wealthy from exploiting the Aztec and Inca resources, extracting large quantities of gold and silver. This wealth fueled European economies, leading to the rise of Spain as a global power. In North America, the English in Virginia set up the headright system to encourage settlers to bring more labor into the colony by promising them land. The fur trade expanded in the northern regions, with competition for resources like beaver pelts intensifying. Tribes such as the Wampanoag, Narragansett, and Susquehannock were drawn into European-controlled markets, which created dependence on European goods, like metal tools and firearms. This shift often trapped Native American tribes in unequal trading relationships, leading to economic instability. The Beaver Wars of the mid-1600s, involving the Iroquois, Huron, and Susquehannock, were driven by competition over the fur trade and European alliances, resulting in large-scale disruptions to traditional native economies. These policies had serious economic consequences for both sides. Native Americans lost their traditional ways of living as they became more dependent on European goods. For the Europeans, the fur trade became a major economic driver, especially for the French, who relied on alliances with tribes like the Huron to maintain their profits. In the South, the English plantation economy depended on native labor, as seen in early Virginia and the Carolinas, where Native Americans were sometimes enslaved or forced into labor contracts. The introduction of European diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza devastated native populations, contributing to a sharp decline in their numbers. This biological impact was often referred to as the Great Dying, where it is estimated that as much as 90% of Native Americans died from disease by the early 1700s. The introduction of disease not only reduced Native American populations, but also weakened their ability to resist European expansion. In some cases, Europeans used disease as a weapon, such as during Pontiac's rebellion, when British forces under Lord Geoffrey Amherst suggested distributing blankets infected with smallpox to Native Americans. The introduction of European diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza devastated native populations, contributing to a sharp decline in their numbers. This biological impact was often referred to as the Great Dying, where it is estimated that as much as 90% of Native Americans died from disease by the early 1700s. The introduction of disease not only reduced Native American populations, but also weakened their ability to resist European expansion. In some cases, Europeans used disease as a weapon, such as during Pontiac's rebellion, when British forces under Lord Geoffrey Amherst distributed blankets infected with smallpox to the Native Americans. Native American resistance to European domination took many forms. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680, led by a Native American leader named Pope, was one of the most successful uprisings against European settlers in what is now New Mexico. The Pueblos fought to protect their religious beliefs and way of life from the Spanish missionaries who were forcing them to convert to Christianity. Similarly, the Powhatan Confederacy in Virginia resisted the English colonists during the Anglo-Powhatan Wars, particularly in Opechancanoug's uprising of 1622, where they attacked settlements to push back English expansion. Native Americans used diplomatic negotiations as well, especially when military resistance wasn't enough. The Iroquois Confederacy played European powers against each other, allying with the Dutch and later the British to preserve their autonomy for as long as possible. In the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, for example, the Iroquois ceded large parts of their land to the British, but they did so through negotiations that allowed them to retain some control over their fate. However, treaties often came at a great cost. The Treaty of Greenville followed General Anthony Wayne's victory over Native American forces in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, forcing tribes to give up much of their land in the Ohio Valley to the U.S. government. Despite the many conflicts, these interactions also led to significant cultural exchange. Both Europeans and Native Americans influenced each other in terms of farming techniques, weaponry, and even political ideas. For instance, the Three Sisters farming method, corn, beans, and squash, adopted by Europeans, helped sustain settlers, while Native Americans began using horses for hunting and warfare, particularly amongst tribes like the Comanche. The Iroquois Confederacy's structure is also said to have inspired aspects of the U.S. Constitution. Native Americans adopted European horses and metal tools, while Europeans learned survival strategies, such as hunting and farming, that were crucial for their colonial success. The long-term impacts of these interactions shaped the future of the United States and Latin America. Native Americans faced enormous challenges, but their resistance, through both diplomacy and war, shows how much they fought to protect their lands, beliefs, and way of life. In the end, the reason European and Native American ideas about each other changed boils down to one thing: constant interaction. At first they misunderstood each other, but over time, both groups learned, adapted, and in many cases clashed violently. So why did ideas change? Because when different cultures meet, especially under the pressure of land and resources, they don't stay the same. Interaction, even if it's tense, means both sides walk away changed forever. Gradually, interactions between Europeans and natives meant that opinions of interactions with Africans changed too, particularly amongst some of the British.